Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is Church360 Members Year-End Financial Management. My name is Peter Frank. I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing Technology at Concordia Publishing House as part of the Concordia Technology Solutions team. You'll probably be familiar with me because this is our fourth in a series of 6 training webinars on Church360 Members. But if not, you can see my contact information is on the screen, peter.frank@cph.org. I invite you to send me any questions that you have if you're watching this after the fact. If I can't answer them, I'll probably send them over to our support team. Or I may send them over to our support team anyways because they are so good at answering questions. But one of the great things about being in a live webinar is that you can ask the questions, put them in the chat, and I'll answer them live. So if you're watching afterwards, you can reach out to me. If you're watching live, feel free to reach out to me as well. Like I said, this is a series of 6 sessions. We covered basic contact management on Monday, building out person profiles on Tuesday. Yesterday, we entered offerings and figured out that whole process. Today, we're going through year-end financial management. Then on Monday, we're going to be tracking events and attendance. And Tuesday, we're going to be building reports. So we've got a full week and a half of training. Like I mentioned, this is the 4th one. We're doing year-end financial management. If you missed those other 3, don't worry, we have them available in our resource center and you can go watch them at your leisure. A few housekeeping items before we begin. My plan is 75 minutes for presentation. I am notorious for going over that. So if I do, I apologize. I will just be eating into our 15 minutes for question and answers. But if we have enough questions, I will spend more than 15 minutes answering them. So I'm willing to go over the time. I hate to take up too much of your time, but you're here to learn, and I'm going to try to teach as much as I can. But if you have questions or I miss some things, that's not time to get those answers. So I appreciate your patience if I go over. This is my goal. We'll see if I can meet it. Now we are recording this and we will be sharing it, and we'll be recording the entirety, including the question and answers. So even if you have to step away, or if it gets into lunchtime and you have to, you're that hungry, you need some food, go ahead. We will be sharing this recording. I do say that all attendees are muted, and that can be kind of confusing, especially if this is one of your first webinars. But because we have so many people on here, I can't have everybody asking questions verbally. It's going to be a mess talking over each other. So you all are muted, and I'm the only one that will be speaking. But I certainly want your engagement. I certainly want your questions, and that's why I encourage you to ask them throughout. In fact, we've got a few people who are already asking questions, which is great. So I'll be covering those answers either during the presentation or during the Q&A session. Now, one of my coworkers, Tim Burke, is on the line. Tim is with our software support team. He's been with us all week answering questions throughout the webinar. It's fantastic to have you, Tim. Thank you very much for being here. This allows you as attendees to get answers from Tim while I'm talking. So even if I don't answer them live, you'll get your answers from Tim. So it's a tag team effort. We're happy to be here together. A few assumptions that I'm making about you today. I am assuming you are a brand new user to Church360 Members. Now, you maybe not be. We have a lot of people on here, and I recognize names from over the last few years of people using Church360 Members. But I'm going to be presenting as if you are a brand new user, because we do have many of those as well. So we're going to be starting at ground zero with these topics. We're going to be working our way up to some more advanced information. So there's a good chance that you'll know some of the stuff that I'm already talking about, but I'm assuming that you don't. I'm also assuming that you have full access to all features, that role of administrator. Now, it's very likely that many of you don't have that access. You probably have limited access, especially because we're talking about financial management. That's a very specific area of Church360 Members, and so you will probably be limited. I'm hoping you'll have access to all the features today. If you don't, talk with your actual administrator at the church, the administrator of your account. They'll be able to provide you that access. And finally, I'm assuming you attended the first 3 sessions or watched them after the fact. We're not going to be doing a full review of everything we cover. That would take us too long. So I'm assuming you've seen that. If there's questions related to what we covered in the first 3 topics, I'll defer those or answer them very quickly. So I just wanted you to be aware that that is my assumption. That's what I'm working off of today. All right, my training goal. I like to have a training goal, kind of my central focus. By the end of today, you will know how to prepare and complete the year-end processes for offerings. And when I say financial management, that's what I mean. It's all about offerings, bringing money into the congregation, that income side of things. We do have a separate Church 360 application called Church 360 Ledger. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I've got a webinar, I believe it's next Thursday. I'll be sending out email announcements about that soon. We'll also have some training sessions for that in a few weeks. That is about all other aspects of financial management, assets and liabilities, the management of income and expenses. But today we're going to talk about how income coming in from individual people, those members, that's why we're in Church 360 Members, or maybe it's visitors, but from people bringing in income, giving their gifts, giving their offerings and tithes to the congregation, managing that side of things. So that's our goal for today. The outline, pretty simple. It's deceptively simple, actually. We're going to talk about offering envelopes. We're going to look at pledges and how to add those on our home to plan out your year or whatever time period. And then we're going to look at contribution statements. Simple enough, right? You and I both know better that these are very complex subjects. And so that's why we're only covering these three things today. Now, one last thing before I get started. We are recording this, or presenting live and recording it on, what is today, April 30th. A lot of people, a lot of churches will manage these tasks at the end of the year. Now that may be the end of the fiscal year, at least with pledges. Now contribution statements and offering envelopes typically happen at the end of the calendar year or the beginning of the calendar year. So offering envelopes, we'll see people typically managing those in November and December timeframe, handing them out in advance of the new year. We, as a publishing house, we provide offering envelopes as a service or as a product, and we'll see most of our orders ship out in October and November. We'll have a few non-calendar year dates on offering envelopes, but that's pretty rare. So I think it's a safe assumption to say that you'll be doing that at the end and beginning of the year. You'll be giving new envelopes for January 1st. Contribution statements are really tied to income taxes. So that happens typically in January, February timeframe. You're sending those statements to your members. Now you may be doing these on a quarterly basis or maybe a twice a year basis. I've heard of a few churches who do it on a monthly basis. Well, that is all up to you. But these all are really tied together. And so that's why we're talking about them at this time of the year as opposed to the end of the year. We'll do some review and I'll point you to a blog post about offering envelopes later on. That's probably the questions, the process we're covering today that will generate the most questions because it's so flexible. All right, well, let's go ahead. Oh, before we do that, if you don't already have a trial account or a paid account of Church 360 Members, sign up today, follow along. I'm assuming most of you do. This is more of the advanced topics. This isn't the exploratory phase. So go ahead and start there today. But we're gonna log in and go to Church 360 Members right now because we've got a lot to cover. I wanna get into it. All right, you'll see here, this is our people individuals screen. This is kind of our home base for Church 360 Members. We've been going here a lot. We're going to start off talking about offering envelopes, and that is over under the settings cog. And as you scroll down, or at least move your mouse down, it's going to be called envelopes. It's the same thing as offering envelopes. We just didn't want to have it stretch out too far. So we're going to click on envelopes. And here we are. Now, there is a lot going on in this screen, and it's kind of compact. If you've been with me for the first few sessions, you'll know that I talked about the zoom function within your browser. I've zoomed out now to 100%. I've got a little bit more working space and white space on the screen. It's a little less overwhelming, but you're going to have trouble seeing that from home. So I'm going to zoom in by clicking the control button on my keyboard and pressing plus a couple of times to get to about 150. Depending on your monitor size, depending on your eyesight, you may prefer a different zoom level, and that's what's up to you. But I'm hoping that you'll be able to see this level of zoom. In fact, I may even go a tad more. Ooh, that's pretty big for me, but I'll leave it at that, And if we struggle with it, I'll zoom out a little bit, but I really want you to see what's going on here. So let's talk about the concept of offering envelopes first. Surprising, I've actually found some people who don't have any clue about offering envelopes. Now, to be fair, they're people in Europe. We are working with a company in Germany right now to implement a new computer system for our organization, or at least a new back-end software for our business systems. And when we started talking to them about offering envelopes, they didn't know what we were talking about at all. Because over there, they have payroll deductions where you can easily contribute to the church. It's a different kind of relationship that the church and state has. And I don't claim to know enough about it, but I do know that they were very confused by the concept of offering envelopes. Now, I'm assuming you know what it is, but if not, I'm going to do a quick review because I want to put that into that context, really talk about that time frame. Offering envelopes are envelopes that the church purchases in sets, typically one per week, so 52 envelopes, and then special inserts for different occasions, holidays, or certain emphases like a building fund. So we covered funds yesterday. You'll often see that the churches will go through their list of funds and then pick a number of envelopes for each fund. And it may only be one or maybe 12, once a month, put that fund in there, that fund envelope. So it's a different process for each church, but this concept is that the church will distribute these envelopes to members. Members will put cash or a check in the envelopes and put it in the offering plate each week. Now, many members will forget to bring in their offering envelopes, and so they'll still just put in cash or check. And we covered that process of offering entry yesterday. You can enter it by the name of the person or by the envelope number. Well, what gets tricky is that churches will only buy offering envelopes once a year. I mean, that's how we sell them as a publishing house. That's what your preference is for buying them. Occasionally, we'll get requests for, well, I want to buy 2 years at a time or something like that, but that's pretty rare. The reason that it's on a 1-year basis is probably driven by the fact that we produce them primarily on a 1-year basis, but it could also be that, and this is pretty practical, I think, it's that church's membership changes on an annual basis. And so what you had last year, the number of people who receive envelopes from last year will be different than this year. And it may not be a big difference, or maybe it is a lot. Maybe you gained a lot of new members, or maybe you lost a lot. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But because that quantity changes, you'll purchase a different number from your offering envelope provider, and the numbers that you assign to people will change. Now, that's essentially the benefit of an offering envelope, besides having a nice package to put the gift in. The benefit is that it is a number assigned to a person that you can easily see and enter, that you can use for privacy's sake, and it just adds to the efficiency of offering entry. Now, I've seen that change from a concept into almost a rule for some churches or for some individuals, where this envelope number becomes something rather sacred. There is one instance I know where a person says, I am a founding member of this congregation, and so my envelope number should always be within the first 10 envelope numbers. That's a true story. I thankfully don't know who that person is, but that was shared with me by somebody in the church office. But I don't understand that concept. And if I knew who that person was, I'd say, why is that important? But the reality is that it is important. And this person is a generous donor. And so regardless of whether we understand that concept, we want to respect the wishes of the donors because it's important to them. And the donors are important to us in the church. So that's where this complexity comes in, and that you can't just say, all right, this year we're going to send out these envelope numbers, here's your new number. For some churches, it's as simple as that, but for some, it's not. So we're going to get into how to accommodate all of those different preferences, all of the practical aspects of that. And that's where this process becomes very flexible and difficult. So we're on the envelope screen. The first thing I want to highlight is that you'll have a search up at the top. We've talked about that convention before. If you're doing all of your envelope numbers at one time, you don't really need to use that. You're going to be going through this list. But if you're changing envelope numbers during the year, or maybe somebody loses their box and needs a new number, that's going to be really helpful. So if you need to get down to like the Robinsons, you don't want to scroll all that way. You just type it and it'll filter it down from there. Over here on the right is our Smart Group selector. And we've talked about that a bunch. We're going to use that a bunch in just a few minutes. Then you have your table. On the first column, you have the name of usually it's the husband. Then you'll have the spouse. I'm not sure exactly how that's ordered, other than it seems like it's the husband first and then the spouse, but I don't think that's always the case. So just know that that's how we typically pick it. It might be household order, although that doesn't necessarily affect contributors. So I think it goes to the husband, and then you have the option to add a spouse here. And that's kind of a weird thing to do under offering envelopes. Why would you add a spouse here? Well, there's two ways of giving. You can give as an individual, or you can give jointly. And this is tied in with tax laws, where you have to be married in order to contribute jointly. And so that's why we have add spouse here, because often the first time you notice that there's two people in the system who should be married but aren't is when you're doing offering envelopes. They may have been in that system for up to a year, and they've been married for longer than that, but you didn't update the data, or they weren't married in the software. And so this is where you find out. So that's what we put in here. Makes it easy for you to go ahead and add that spouse. And so all you have to do is go in there and start typing the name. Now, Julie Billings doesn't actually have a spouse in there, but that's how you'd find it, and you'd assign it to them. You'll still want to go back and add in their wedding date and all of that other things, but you can marry them in the envelopes for you. Now, this is where you'll also see this contributes jointly. Just because you're married doesn't mean you have to contribute jointly. There's a number of reasons that I can't even begin to get into or say that I understand why you would not contribute jointly. But you can separate givers at this time. And so it's a different thing. Just because you have a spouse in here doesn't mean they contribute jointly. So you see on the Barnes family, we've been using them a lot. If I unselect contributes jointly, I get two different lines, and it's kind of a crisscross there, where you see Nikki and Quinn separately, and then their spouses are indicated, but this contributes jointly is still a separate concept. Very good. Next, current envelope number. That is the current envelope number assigned. If you're brand new to Church360 Members, you won't have anything there. So just know that that's for what's currently happening. We'll get into don't renumber in a few minutes, but this next envelope number, this entry field here, this is what we're talking about. What are we going to do with that number? Are we going to change it? Are we going to leave it the same? That's the process. It's all about that, but everything else goes into it. Let's talk about conceptually how you want to handle this. The first thing you want to do is figure out who receives offering envelope numbers. And that's going to be different between every church. And when I say envelope numbers, I mean literally who's going to receive the envelopes that have numbers on them. Envelopes cost money. They don't cost a lot, depending on how many inserts you have, depending on the colors, the printing, all of that. The price will vary, but it's going to be a few dollars a box. That's an investment in receiving offerings back. So there's value in paying for envelopes, but it's a return on investment kind of thought. Well, do I give somebody envelopes when they haven't contributed in a while? Am I going to invest the few dollars in that person when it's not going to come back? That's a decision you have to make at the church. And I hate to put it so crudely as, saying there's ROI on offering envelopes, but it's a logical discussion. Do we want to spend that much money? So your first order of business is to narrow the list down to just the people who get it. Well, that makes it a little bit difficult. You can narrow it down, and that's where Smart Groups comes in. So let's say you're just giving to members. I'll switch my Smart Group to members, and my list will filter down. I don't see anybody off the top who filtered, but I want to highlight one thing before we go too far on that. Your next envelope column will be hidden. So let's say we want to go to members whose last name is not Abbott. We'll give that a second to update. The Abbott family disappeared. Now they were on envelope number 101. They're still going to be assigned envelope number 101, even though they're not showing in the view. So this filter hides people, but the data is still there. So the first thing you want to do, actually, is clear out your envelope numbers, your next envelope numbers. It's always going to default to what is currently assigned. So if you haven't touched renumbering, it's going to show that next number. What I recommend you doing right off the bat is hitting this clear all while everybody is showing. Actually, let me go back to everyone. It may have done that naturally anyways, because typically you're only giving it to numbers. But I'm going to clear out. No envelope numbers are assigned right now by hitting clear all. Now I'm going to figure out who I want to have receive envelope numbers. It's certainly not everybody. That includes people who are former members, family members of your current members, visitors. That's a little presumptuous to give visitors an offering envelope number. Well, there's a number of ways you can do this, and this is going to vary at your church. I recommend starting with members. So if I select it to members, it drops my number down to 192. You may say that people who are kids don't get offering envelope numbers, but how do you define kids? Is a kid under 13? Is a kid under 18? Well, if you're 17 and you're working part-time, it's a very good spiritual habit to get into to contribute some of your income. And what better way to track it than with an offering envelope number? So some churches will say, well, you have to be confirmed. That age will vary, but that's one of those kind of initiations into confirmed membership, is that you are now expected to contribute some amount to your church. So you can say anyone who is a living member now who is confirmed. Well, that cuts out a lot of the kids. Now, like I said before, you don't want to necessarily invest in people with a box of offering envelopes if they're not going to contribute. So you could say anyone who is confirmed ever who have not contributed to any fund either ever or in the last maybe 2 years. Maybe you give them an extra period of time. Well, that's gonna actually change things even more. I'm losing out on some people that I actually thought had contributed. Oh, sorry, this is showing anybody who has not. So these are the people who haven't given. But if I say the people who have, so sorry, I phrased that wrong and I put it in. Let me back up a quick second. If you want to exclude the people who haven't given, therefore including only the people who have given, that's what you're doing here. So people who have contributed to any fund in the last 2 years. That drops us down to 116. And it's still a custom group. That's the way smart groups work. And so if we want to save this group so we remember that next time, we can say save group receives offering envelopes. And we'll save that right now. Let's say there's some exceptions to the rule. So Troy and Kira Belton, we're going to say they're an exception. Let's say that they give electronically. That's how me and my wife contribute. Because I'm comfortable giving electronically, I don't want to receive an offering envelope number. I'm not going to use, or offering envelopes, I'm not going to use them because my gifts to my church are taken out automatically every week. So I don't want the church to spend money on an offering envelopes for me. And Troy and Kira Belton are going to be our example. Let's go to people. We could say, before, while I'm getting over there, we could say that we're just going to remember not to assign them a number. But that's going to be hard to remember year in, year out. And there's a certain tool that we have that says you can use this for identifying people for things that are true or not true, and that is tags. So we'll go into Troy. Oops, I went to Darren. I meant to go to Troy. Darren's the kid. Troy contributes to the church electronically, does not want to receive offering envelope numbers. So let's tag him with something. Well, what do you want to say? Do you want to say Troy contributes electronically? You could. It's probably safer to say does not receive envelope. And we'll put that on Troy. And we might as well go ahead and put that on Kira as well, even though they would drop out together. So does not receive envelopes. So that is a very factual statement. And that's what tags should be. They should be facts that are true. So Troy and Kira do not receive envelopes. That's it. We're going to go back up to our envelopes view. Oh, I should also say, because tags are not where you should put confidential information, that's another reason to put it like that. Putting does not receive offering envelopes could be done for a number of different reasons, but those reasons are unknown. And so it's a very factual statement. So it receives offering envelopes. This group, Troy and Kira, are still in there until we say add trait who, and we'll go to tags, whose tags do not contain envelopes. Oh, you know what? I need to refresh real quick because I added a tag that way. That's one of those things that we really should look at fixing, just that refresh. Because of the way servers work, we will cache things in your system so that you don't have to refresh every time, but sometimes it's necessary to refresh. Does not. Okay, so whose tags do not include, does not receive envelopes. That's a little, it's a double negative. Tags do not contain, does not receive envelopes. I put it that way because that's how my mind works. You may want to tag everybody who receives envelopes and say whose tags contain receives envelopes, but you're going to have a much more likely chance of missing somebody there. So I like to do this as the exception. And so we'll just put it whose tags do not include. So everybody else, as long as they don't have that tag. And you'll see there the Beltons are removed. So I'm going to hit save group right now and save changes, save as a new group. I should have the ability to save. Oh, people who, I'm not sure why that changed for me. That's all right. Receives offering envelopes. Name has already been taken. Let me go up. It should override it, but it changed it to a custom group. So I'm just going to go back to my smart groups. Here, we'll go down to receive envelope number, and I'm just going to add it here. It works the same way, and it gives us another way of looking at it. Whose tags do not contain this tag here. Save that. Good. We'll go back into envelope numbers. Sorry I went through that quickly. We covered that in a different session. So I'm going to go and say receives offering envelopes. And Troy and Kira are now removed from that. All right, I've got my list down to the right people. That's the first step. Now that I'm back in here, let me go to everyone. I haven't saved anything, so I need to clear all again. That's one thing to remember. And you'll have that little dot saying they used to receive it and now it's empty. Now we'll go into receives offering envelopes. Let's talk about don't renumber. Don't renumber says, I don't want this to automatically apply any number. You're just going to leave it with what's currently in next envelope number. So I've cleared it all out. I think that's the way to go for it. And let's say our envelope numbers are all 3 digits and they start at 101. You type in that starting point down here in the lower part of your screen, right next to renumber. You type in 101 and you click renumber. It's going to fill in all of the blanks sequentially. But let me go ahead and clear all again. Let's say that Norm Roberts is the person who wants to receive envelope number 103. He just says, I like that number. That should be my offering envelope number. I can go in and type in 103 right there, and then select do not renumber. It's going to lock in 103 for Norm Roberts. And then when I go and click the renumbering again, it's going to fill in all of the other numbers. 103 is assigned to Norm Roberts. You see 156 goes to John Presley. It jumps Norm Roberts. 157 goes to the Roberts. If I go up here, 103 is not assigned. That's where that don't renumber comes in. But it's important to remember that there has to be a number under next envelope number. So one way you can handle this is when you get to that screen where I've been clicking clear all, you can go and click the don't renumber first and then clear everybody else. It's up to you. The important thing is to understand how the tools work. I can't tell you exactly how you should do this, but if I can teach you the tools, then you can do it the way that you'd like. So we've got our envelope numbers pretty much ready to go. As you'll go down the list, you'll see changes happen more so like because it's sequential. So by the time we get down to Jennifer Yang, it's changed, her number has changed from 169 to 171. We've locked in one number as an earlier number, and then some people like the Lyles who didn't get an envelope number last time now have an envelope number this time. And then we've added like the Barnes, that family, they didn't have an envelope number before, they get it now. So your numbers are going to vary. They're not going to vary a lot if you go through this process because it's alphabetical and it's sequential. Well, now we've got new envelope numbers and we hit apply changes, except that it's April 30th and we don't want to apply the changes yet. Or maybe you're doing this later in the year. It's still only November. I don't want to apply the new envelope numbers yet because as soon as I apply them, then this 106 is going to get me Julie Billions rather than 105. That's why we have schedule renumbering. Let me say that another way. If you go ahead and apply the numbers before the start of the year, before they're supposed to be given, you're going to assign offerings to the wrong person. Hopefully that's a little bit more bold and scary. You want to assign the new envelope numbers before the date of the first offerings of the new year, but after the date of the last offerings of the old year. And depending on the calendar, that might be a different date each year. Let's go down here. I think, yeah, you can see my calendar. Let's talk about this coming year. So December 31st is on a Thursday. If you have New Year's Eve services, you're going to want to make sure December 31st is included in that. But I'm guessing that you're not going to be entering offerings before January 1st. You know, in between the end of the service and January 1st. I think most New Year's services are not going up until midnight, but that puts you in a crunch, and that's okay. And chances are you're not going to have services on January 1st. I haven't heard of too many New Year's Day services. Now, if your church has that, then you do. And so you're going to have some iffiness here. Thankfully, it's not about the actual date, but it's about the date of entry. So if you are not entering your new envelopes on January 1st, but rather you do that every Monday, well, you can make that change and say, all right, we're going to enter in our last offerings, now make that change on envelope numbers, now enter our next year's. So think about that timing. I can't tell you the right answer because I don't know exactly how it goes at your church. But again, I want to make sure you understand how it works so that you can plan accordingly. So if you have any specific questions, if it's hard to do the math, well, you can reach out to me or you can reach out to the support team. We'll be happy to talk you through the process. We'll ask you what you do at your church, when the services are, all of that. The last thing I'll mention about this before I show you how to reschedule it is that it's important to communicate this to your members when they get their new offerings. And our church does that. We just say, please don't use your new envelope numbers until this date, whatever that date is. That way you know exactly that the envelope numbers are going to be true up until that point and then not. Now, you and I both know that there's going to be people who are like, oh, I found this envelope from 2017. Here you go, and mess up the whole thing. We can't prevent that programmatically from happening other than saying, you know, encourage people to use the envelope numbers at the right time. Say, all right, we are on the new envelope numbers. If you have any old ones, throw them out. You don't want to use them or recycle them. Recycle your old envelopes. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox now and show you the scheduling and renumbering. So we've assigned our new numbers. This is saying what it is today, current envelope number today. If I hit schedule renumbering and I want to assign that to, let's say, we're going to do them on January 2nd. It says renumber 71 envelopes and change the contribution status of 0 marriages. We're not actually changing marriages status here on January 2nd. I'll hit save. All right. We have now saved that renumbering. Now I'm zoomed in a little bit, so let me zoom out so that it aligns properly. Yeah, don't worry about this too much. But I now have, I'll zoom in so you can see it. I now have a new date up here. It says scheduled for January 2nd. This is what our scheduled envelopes will be. If I click back, this now says what it is for today. That way, if I want to change something for the rest of this year, so it's in the middle of April, let's say come August 1st, somebody says, I lost my envelopes, can I get new ones? You can still go in here and change it. Let's say Rob Calloway lost it. He can go in here, you can delete it and put in the new one. Now, if you say, I don't know if you can see this or not, it's very light, but it's gonna show this next available envelope number because envelopes start at 1. But if we say envelopes start at 101, and then I click in here, you can see the one, it says the next available number is 107. Well, that's a little bit confusing. If we type in here, 107 is currently assigned to Rob Calloway. You click in another empty one, it says 172 is the next available number. So if you're changing somebody, you're getting rid of 107, you can go in and type 172. But that's what that number in here shows. So it's a little bit confusing. It's not the best solution. We don't exactly, can't assign 2 numbers to a person. So I just wanted to clarify that. But if you get a new family, you click in here, it'll show the next available number. You can also see this new message came up here. 72 given units are scheduled to have a different envelope number on January 2nd. This is where you can go and edit the scheduled renumbering. Anything else? The last thing I wanted to mention is that you can apply these changes here. We talked about that before when I said don't do that. But if you have a scheduled renumbering and you're just saying, I want this to change today, this is where you can go and apply those changes. All right, we'll get into some questions in just a moment, but I want to show you one thing. On our blog, and I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it into the chat to send to everybody. On our blog, I've gone through this process in great detail, hopefully great detail, and I had it get ready for 2019. The process is the same, but I walk through this again throughout this thing. The last thing I have here is part 3, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But you can get some of your answers here. You can watch the video. You can rewatch this webinar. One more time, I'll say it. I'm showing you the tools. I'm not telling you how to do it at your church. Your church has your own processes, and we've built Church360 Members to hopefully accommodate every one of those. Now, there might be some things we haven't thought of. That's where you let us know, and we'll see what we can do. Let's take a look at a few questions. What is most common? Oh, we'll get into that in a few minutes. How do you delete a spouse from offerings who is deceased? So that would be when you would go in here. So let's say, in many of my examples, I kill off Leon Carter. I haven't done that today, but I'd kill off Leon Carter. He passed away. That sounds so bad. He passed away, and now we'll go in here and say, all right, uncheck contributes jointly and put Teresa as 109. And then if you actually mark Leon as deceased in there, he'll be removed from there, but at least these are only associated with Teresa. That's how you would do that. And saying, what is the point of renumbering at the end of the year? In the past, we've just left all people with the same numbers from year to year. And if that's your choice, go for it. I tried to explain that a little bit at the beginning, why you would renumber, is if you're not buying the same number, if you have people leave and you want to reuse some of those numbers. Let's say the person who has 102 leaves your church or passes away, well, you're not going to want to buy a box with 102, and you can't buy it without 102, so you might want to assign that to somebody else. So that's why. And I think that's, but if you never want to renumber envelope, oh, Cheryl, I missed your comment. That's the exact same thing. Yep. All right. Our church does not, Joy saying our church does not renumber offering envelopes, and for us, that's a good option. Excellent. I know a lot of people who wish they did not have to renumber envelopes because it's a confusing process. Very good. Let's move into the next section, still under renumbering envelopes, but this will be the last step. How do you distribute these envelopes to people, and how can Church360 members help? Well, there's one way of doing it where you say, I know that you're 103, here's 103. I know that you're 104, here's 104. That's easier said than done. We try to make it easy by giving you this view. So we've looked at individuals and the households, but we're going to go to people and then switch it to givers. You'll see here on givers that you've got a few columns, not a lot. In fact, if you click on columns, you don't have that many here. You have the name of the giver, and if they give jointly, then you have that right there. You have their address, envelope number, current envelope number, and next envelope number. You'll see how that changes on here. We're taking away envelopes from Troy and Kira. And the type of contributor there. Then up here under download, we have mailing labels. And I haven't covered mailing labels in great detail. I'm going to show that a little bit on Tuesday. But if we click mailing labels, this is the ability to print out two stickers or labels on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Avery has all sorts of templates. They're a company that prints labels. They have templates with numbers. We accommodate several of them. If you click through here, you can see the different ones. Like this one has 30 on it. This one I think has a few less than 30. And let's see, that's 30. Maybe this one has more than 30. And then 561. They're all different shapes and sizes. Yeah, this one only has 14. So you can print labels with people on it, but you can say print addresses, print mailing barcodes, or you can print envelope numbers. So you can print the current ones or the next ones. What I would recommend doing is going in here and saying, oops, go to my smart group of people who receives offering envelope numbers, or you can go up to everyone and say add trait envelope number who have a next envelope number at all. And it'll filter to just this list of people who have envelope numbers. We'll sort that. Oh, and it looks like, yeah, there we go. There's 103 right there. Then you can go up here, download mailing labels. It's just going to be the people who are showing. Print next envelope numbers, and then generate either a Word document or a PDF. It's going to look the same, but a Word document will let you modify things later on. So we're going to do a Word document. Let's see what that looks like. It's probably going to show up down on my other monitor. I'll pull it up to the top. There we go. So you'll see all it does is print in a label format the name and envelope number, and then you can, we'll enable editing. You can pick how you want to do this. You can select everything, make the font, you know, your preferred font, make the font larger, however you want to do it, print it out, put these labels on the envelopes, and then you'll know that it's Dave and Suzanne Abbott who are 101. You don't have to look at a reference list or anything like that. So we provide that option for you. That's our recommended path. There's a lot of other ways of doing it. I mean, if you wanted to, you could just print out that sheet, but then you have a sheet of paper out there that has name and envelope number, and that removes a lot of the privacy if somebody gets a hold of that sheet. So do your labels, put them on the envelopes, hand them out that way. All right, we are at 10:44. Oh, Joanne says, I noticed Teresa Carter doesn't have a scheduled envelope. Will that autofill for January 1? That is one thing that I should have gone in and shown you under envelopes. Remember, I removed the contributors from giving jointly. So if I go into edit scheduled envelopes, I've basically ruined that they are giving jointly. Let's go, oops, Carter, what is that? Yeah, they are showing there. if I unselect it and put it in that state, basically what it's doing is it's remarrying them. So that's something I'll have to check and see how that works with. I don't think it's going to automatically marry them now, but I can go in and say there, she is 110, and then save scheduled renumbering. So that is one thing to think about. Typically what happens, and I should have clarified this, since this happens so late in the year, any changes to this will be done on your scheduled renumbering rather than your current one. So if somebody passes away in December, you typically wouldn't update it immediately. You just do it with renumbering, but you'd have that choice. You just have to go and do it in both places. Thanks for clarifying that or asking that question, Joanne. Joy has a great idea here. If someone loses their envelopes, we just ask them to use a plain envelope and put their number on it until the following January. That is a wonderful idea. That's so good for everybody involved. And then Peggy's saying, if I opt to print addresses on the label, does it use the household address, primary, or the alternate if it's currently being used? That's a really good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Tim might know that answer and can put it in the chat. Let's see, if we go into David and Suzanne Abbott, it should actually, I should clarify, we'll go test it out real quick. It should be putting in the household information, or at least the primary person's information. We'll add this in, say they are away. They're away at CPH. We'll save that. Let's go back to people real quick. And I'm going quickly just so I can answer this question. We'll refresh it. I think it always defaults to the person's household address, not the person's away. Yeah, it's looking like that. If I go into Dave now, go to the household, change the address to CPH, then go back to people. Yep. So it's saying the active household of the first person on there. So that's the address that will show up. All right. I missed what you clicked to refresh. Barbara, that's a good question. You can hit the refresh circle with an arrow icon in your browser, or if you want to get super fancy, you can hit Control on your keyboard and F5 at the same time, and that will refresh your screen too. That's what's called a hard refresh. That's the best way to, it basically tells the website, go back and give me everything. That's what I would recommend. All right, we have spent a long time on offering envelopes. It's because it's a complex subject. The next two aren't quite as complex, but we're going to jump into pledges next. In the top right corner, underneath settings, there's a pledges button you can click, or pledges link. Let me talk about pledges in an overall view first. Pledges are viewed differently by different churches. I've heard a variety of different ways. Pledges are used in different ways, depending on your church body or your individual congregation. Some churches don't use pledges at all. My church does not use pledges really at all. Occasionally at my church, we will have a pledge where it is just between you and God. And so we have pledge cards, you fill it out, you say, I intend to give this much, you sign it, you put it in an envelope that you self-address, you bring it up into the front of church at some point in time, church holds onto the envelopes, never opens them, and a few months later mails it back to you as a reminder of what you pledged to the Lord. It is completely between you and the Lord, and they never know the specifics of that. That's one way of doing it. That's the way we do it, and we don't even do that every year. Other churches will, on a very regular basis, have pledges for your tithing that help the church budget and understand what the people intend to give. And so they do that same thing where they fill out a card, say, I intend to give this much, maybe to these funds, and they give it to the church, and the church then enters it into a system like this, where they can see the totals, they can have some accountability for people, put it on the contribution statements, and it's a regular process. Other churches will only do pledges when they have a specific purpose. And so maybe it is a building drive, building fund drive, where we say, we want to raise $5 million for a new building. Let us know how much you're going to be giving to that. Well, that's that's a very ambitious thing to do, have a $5 million building project. You need to know if the funds are available. So what Church360 does is we handle those two later situations, and there might be some other situations I'm not describing. Again, it's all over the map. But let me show you how the tool works, and then we can talk about if it applies to your situation or not. This is where there's so many different variables that it's hard to get it just right for everybody, but we're doing our best. So the way that pledges works in Church360 Members is that we allow you to enter a pledge which says this person intends to give this amount on this basis, beginning on this date and ending on this date, and we're going to put it under this fund. 6 different things that you can see listed right there. This view allows you to enter the pledges. And so let's start with Abbott's, Dave and Sue Abbott. They intend to give $50 every week, beginning at the start of January and ending at the end of December, this entire year. And they're going to give it to the general fund. I can add that pledge, and that's what we have. That's just saying they intend to give $50 every week. Now, depending on your time frames, depending on your fiscal year, it may not be January 1 to December 31st. Or you may say you need a different fund or a different amount. Under the periods, you have every week, every other week, twice a month, every year, total amount. So maybe you're doing a building fund and Dave and Sue Abbott pledge $5,000 total amount to that building fund, and you are taking that building fund over the course of 3 years. So January 1st, 2020 to January 2022. So in those 3 years, 2020, 2021, and 2022, they're going to give $5,000. You can add that pledge during that time. So it's flexible if you understand what the tool is doing. It's for different purposes. Now, what I also can show you up at the top, I didn't show this right away because I wanted to give a few things. But if you want to see all the pledges from all time, you can say showing active pledges or switch it to all pledges. I think I already had put, actually, no, I hadn't already put Dave and Suzanne in. I had put them in for last year. We're going to look at that with contribution statements. So I don't have a ton of pledges in here, but I have enough to show how this works. So this filter says all or active. Active means that today's date is within the date range of the start and end of that pledge. That is all it means. It doesn't mean that it's completed. It doesn't mean that it's incomplete or anything. It just means that date range. This date range is going on right now. Because you can give more than you pledged to give, or you can give less. And that's what you're tracking with pledges. Chances are if you use pledges in your church, you're going to have a long list of pledges. You can filter it by a couple things. You can filter it by Dave and Suzanne. You can filter it by the fund. If you see this link over here, you can't filter it by any of these other things. You can't do by total amount or anything like that. It's just Dave and Suzanne or the building fund. But that's how you filter your pledges. If you want to go and view the results of your pledges, that's where this given to date column comes in. So we can click on this, and it's going to take us to our offerings view that we saw yesterday. We started talking about some of the reporting with that, so this should be familiar to you. What it does is it takes you to this view, it puts that date range in place, it puts that giver as a filter, and shows you all of their gifts during that time frame. If you want to change your view and say, well, show me by fund, it's only going to be for Dave and Suzanne Abbott. So I switch my showing to by fund. And now I see the details. So I have the different funds, the average gift, giving and date range, pledged for that date range, ahead or behind, percent of goal. So we have a bunch of different things there because we use that criteria of that one pledge. Let's go back. Go back to pledges. Let's look at their $50 every week to the general fund. If I click on that given to date, they've given $3,690. Well, that's a little bit more than $50 a week. Why don't we bump this up to $300 a week? Then I go click on given to date. Now we have this general fund, their average gift during here. And if I want, I can just click general fund. Their average gift is $246. Now I have this spanning over the entire year. So it says pledge for the date range, because their date range is the whole year. They are pledging to give $15,600, $300 every week. And at this point, they're 23% of the way to the goal. That's not bad. They're a little bit short. Or you could say, let's show where it is today. The last day is going to be today's date. Oops. What is today? April 30th. Last day in April. Well, as of today, based on where they should be, they are $1,400 behind, 72% of where they should be. So they're a little bit behind on their giving. Well, let me clarify one more thing here. This is where it gets a little bit confusing. And, well, I say clarify and then I say confusing. That's kind of an oxymoron right there. Let me explain what the system is doing. Because of how offerings are tracked here, we go a week by week view. And because of the way the calendar works, meaning the calendar will start a year sometime during the middle of the week, those two things are incongruent. They don't align. So what we do with this report is we say, looking at your starting date of the week as you assigned in settings, and if you remember, we do that under general settings. We start our week on Saturday for reporting purposes. Well, we actually are looking at December 28th, 2019 through the end of the year as it aligns there. And then we divide it up by day, or I think it's by week, I apologize, by week, and say what they should be at by this time. That's where that pledge for date range comes in. So if you start doing the math, you might run into some different numbers, but it's looking at that time period, dividing it by the number of weeks that are available in there. So the math is a little fuzzy if you, well, not fuzzy, it's just not always clear because of that starting date by week. If you're doing that, it should work out just fine. If you have questions about that, we get lots of unique situations. I can't go into all of the different variables right now, and we may have to actually look at what it's doing. But if you find that it doesn't seem to make quite sense, or quite the exact sense, that's what's going on here, is that it's dividing it based on the week, and the time frames may not always align. So that's just something to keep in mind. That goes into offering envelope numbers, the starting numbers. It's not necessarily going to be on January 1st. It's not always a clear-cut case of January 1 through December 31st. So keep that in mind when you're looking at that pledged by date. Now that giving in date range will be correct. It's that pledged part of it in the header behind that might be a little off. So the date range is going to be the gifts given during that. So December 28th gifts won't be included in that because it's part of that process. But it's that date range and that for the pledges and how it splits it up. That's going to be a little bit off. All right, Barb's got a question here that I think is a good one that's simple. She's got another one that's a little bit more complex that I'll have to look at in a few minutes. But how do I enter, or when I enter and pledge, does the total pledge show anywhere? Actually, that could be a number of different things. The total pledge would be what we're doing here. For the total pledge for an individual would be what we're doing here, where we look at the entirety of the date range and you see pledge for date range there. But if you wanted to show it for your church as a whole, you can switch into like summaries by fund. We already are there, pardon me. You could do summaries by fund or summaries by giver, but remove the giver. And so you can say the pledged for your church during this range For general fund is 15.6. For building fund is 16.56. There's your total down there. Let's put this in last year. January 1, 2019, December 31st, 2019. We've got a little bit more there from those other ones that I've entered. I can also switch this to summaries by fund by giver, or summaries by giver, and see what individuals have given during that time frame. I can also filter it down if I wanted to and say anyone who has pledged to any fund during year 2019, and only those who have pledges will show. Again, I'm showing you all these tools. Some of these tools you already learned in our previous sessions. You're just seeing how to apply them in different ways. All right, let's see. Is there anything else with pledges before I get into questions? I don't think so. The questions are usually a big part of this. Let me take a look real quick. I think I've only got one other question in here. That's the longer one from Barb. If you have any questions, please put them in now. If I don't get to them now, I'll get to them in a few minutes during our Q&A time. So we have an extra pledge for the building campaign that runs from 2017 through 2020. Someone passed away. After I removed him as a deceased, the past contributions for this campaign did not show up on the statement. I had to go back to where the old offerings and change it to the wife's name. Yeah, Barbara, that is a tough one. When you have somebody pass away, have it under their other name. If you have them contributing jointly, it should still be applied to her, but that joint contributor for past offerings is kind of tough. I am going to defer that one to support. They could work with you in a little bit more detail on that one. All right, so how do you see a detail of a person's giving? Karen, we'll be showing that in just a minute, so you're a little bit ahead of there. The last thing I want to talk about with pledges, I just remembered a question I got the other day. Let's go back to pledges. The question is, how do you attribute pledges for a different, how do you attribute offerings to a pledge of a different time frame? So here's the question. Like a few years ago, we had some tax law changes. A lot of people wanted to give before the end of the year, but they've already met their pledge for that year. I think that was in 2018, going into 2019, if I remember right. All time is blurring together right now. But I think it was that time frame. So somebody wanted to give at the end of December 2018, but have it attributed to their pledge at the end, or for 2019, for that calendar year of 2019. Well, how do you do that in Church360 Members? Because the way the pledges are, the pledges have a start and end date, and the offerings have a specific date. Well, if they gave in December, that's going to go under 2018's pledge and show up under 2018's contribution statement. But they want it to apply to the 2019 pledge. Well, that's a tough situation, and you're stuck between what the person wants to do and what you can legally do. They want it to show up on the 2018 contribution statement for tax purposes, but they want to apply it to the 2019 pledges. Well, you have to obey the government laws. Like that is our call as Christians, is to obey those who are in authority. And so you can't lie on your contribution statement. So you can't just add it to 2018 and then add it to 2019, because then it'll show up on both. You have to say, where do you want this to show up on your contribution statement? Do you want it to show up on your 2018 statement? Then it's going in 2018 and it's not going to apply to your 2019 pledge. You could always move it after you generate the 2018 contribution statement so that they see it in 2019, but you have to remember to remove it from the 2019 statement, otherwise you're breaking the law. So it takes some tough conversations. One thing you can recommend is, or you can do, is you can extend the time frame of your pledge and say, well, why don't we put that back and do December 29th, 2019, and do it not necessarily on the calendar dates, but you could, or I guess I should have done it on this one here. You could say just your 2019 or 20, in this case 2020, your 2020 pledge begins on December 29th, 2019, if you want to give it in that way. Or you could do it kind of middle of the week. You can fudge with your pledge dates because ultimately that does not tie into the government at all. There's no laws around pledges. So you could put your date range that way so it could still fit under both of them because your church is the one who manages your pledge timeframes. That would be my recommendation for that situation. Kind of the best of both worlds. Extend your pledge dates or change your pledge dates so that it goes over the different year. Again, that first of the year time frame is already problematic with offering envelope numbers. Do it in that way. Then your statements can be accurate and your pledges can be accurate. And you're not lying to anybody. You're just changing your time frame. Your 2020 pledge begins December 29th, 2019, or something like that. There's a lot of different scenarios that go into that, so I won't get into any more. I want to get into contribution statements next. If you have any more questions on pledges, just let me know in the chat. We'll get it in the Q&A time. Next up, we're going to go to people. We are going to print contribution statements. Well, what are contribution statements? They might be called giving statements, year-end giving statement. You might call them something different. We call them contribution statements. They are located under the download button on the people screen. They are also located on the download button on a profile screen. See right there. You can do contribution statements in multiple ways, but it's going to be the same whether you do it in a batch or you do it individually. It's just how many of those that you want. So let's talk through this process and how it typically works. Again, there are a lot of different situations here, but what I typically see is that once a year, usually in January, after the books are closed for the year, all your gifts have been entered into the system, you've already updated your envelope numbers, you're well underway in your new year, but you're finalizing your previous year. Once you're done, you print out statements to give to everybody who has given in your church, members, visitors, whoever. That's the gist of it. You print out one statement for everybody and then you mail it to them. Now, if you don't mail it, another way of doing it is to hand it to them when they come to church. That's what my church does. We try to hand as many as possible to save on postage. But the typical situation is that you mail it. That way you're sure they're getting it and you're not, you do it one time, you mail it, you trust the post office system to give it to people, you handle the exceptions if they ask for it. So that's the standard situation. And let's walk through how that works. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to go to the givers view of people, and you're going to find out who needs to get offering or contribution statements. The best way to do that is smart groups. And you say add trait, anyone who contributed, and we're going to do 2019 right now. Anybody who has contributed to any fund during year 2019, any amount by any payment type. There's my people. I'm going to do it by giver name. You'll notice that we have some people who contributed. Actually, yeah, here we go. Oh, this is interesting. So this gives you a little notice and it says, Leon currently contributes jointly with Teresa Carter, but they're scheduled to contribute separately in the future. That's a helpful thing to show. And I bet you I went past that before. Anyways, it's going to show anybody who gave during that year because we set our contributions, or set our smart group to be contributions. If I go up here and go to download, it's going to download everybody in that view, or it's going to generate contribution statements for anybody in that view. If I select one person on there, it changes and it says it's only going to do it for this one person. So just know that this selecting overrides the smart group, but the smart group is the default for who will get that. It's different than if you go in here and say Dave. I'm typing in Dave Abbott. I've got 3 people showing up because this has David placed. If I go to download, it's still going to do it for everybody in that smart group, not just these 3 people, because this is a very light filter, meaning it just hides people from the view temporarily, whereas this is more of a hard filter in that it's excluding people from the view and saying only these people are getting it. So that's the first step. Get your contribution statements to the right spot. Now you might say you are only giving contribution statements for people who gave more than $100. I'm not sure of the legality around that. There's a lot of tax laws that have changed. I'm going to put the onus on you to figure that out because we are not tax experts. We just provide the tools for doing it. But however you want to do that, or maybe it's over $1,000. I know there's fewer benefits for itemizing your statements now. We have a tax person, an accountant who does our taxes for us. She knows exactly what that has to do. I don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to say any amount. I'm going to go to download and download contribution statements. So I have a number of different options here. The first one is just general, saying what time frame do we want? Well, we're talking about 2019, so I'm going to click on last year, and it's going to update my dates. I could also change my dates. So if I'm not doing last year or this year, I can change my dates to exactly what I want them to be. The next thing is generate empty statements for members who didn't give during this date range. Well, this doesn't apply to us because I've already filtered it down to that list. But if you want to give empty contribution statements as a way of encouraging people to give, it's kind of a soft notice of, by the way, you didn't give anything this year. It's a good way to say, to maybe identify some errors somebody gets and says, of course I did. Why do you not have my offerings? Well, then you can go fix it. This is, again, the tools for doing that. So depending on how you filter your list, depending on whether you generate these empty statements or not, that will determine if they get that statement. Before I go to generate this, I want to show under customize. You have a number of different options here on what should actually appear on the statement. So general settings say, what statements am I bringing up? Who's going to get a statement? Customize says, what does the statement look like? You can include a summary of givers' pledges, or you can exclude that. If you don't do pledging at your congregation, you should not check that button. But if you do pledges, that's your call if you want to show it there or not. You don't have to. The next thing is an itemized list of each offering. Do you want to list every single thing? Or do you just want to do a summary by fund? That's your call. And then you also have the church logo on each statement. That's one of the other uses of this logo that I forgot to mention the other day. So we are going to include all of those. And then I'm also going to put the federal ID on here just for tax purposes. This is the church's federal ID. Next, you have an IRS message statement, and the IRS requires you to put in here that there were no goods or services exchanged for these contributions. They were purely offerings to a church. And so we have some starter text for you. If you want to change it, you can. This is the default. If you change it, what was it again? Just hit reset. It puts it back in there for you. So we're going to stick with this top part first, then we'll get into emailing. So these are the statements that we're going to do, and then we're going to click generate PDF. Now this is going to take a second because it has a lot of different things it's pulling from. It's looking at all your offerings, it's looking at your different settings, it's looking at who you're generating these for, and it compiles this information on the fly. So there's no like history of this. It's not like, well, every year on January 1st, it generates the statements and makes them available for you to download. You have to generate it on the fly. All right, that's done. That wasn't too bad. I'll click the download statements, and it's going to open the PDF. This is what it looks like. All right, up at the top, we have the logo and the name of the church. We have the address of the person, which we have identified as the household address, whether it is the primary or if the away address is activated or post office address. We have the issued on date. This is the date of printing today, 4/30. We have the page and total page number, so page 1 of 2. We have the giver, informal, it says David and Suzanne Abbott, not Dave and Sue. We have the federal ID for the church and the IRS statement. Then we have the contribution time frame. so that you know exactly when these were given. If you give quarterly statements, it'll update those dates. It'll update everything according to the quarter. And you have this total amount right here. Then it breaks it up by fund. So building fund, $1,300 during that time frame. This box here is your pledge information. If you don't include pledge information, this box disappears. It says this is what you pledged, $30 every week in this time frame. Here's your pledged amount for that time frame, the total pledge. Here's your given amount. You are behind by $260. Then it shows every single individual gift given to that fund. And it also will show, it'll show the date and the memo, or the amount and the memo if there was one. This is because we included the details. As we scroll down, we get to the next page. Now we get into the general fund. Issued on this date, all of that stuff stays at the top, but now it's page 202, and you have the same amount. The next page will be for the next giver, giving the same information. And so you just scroll down, we have 133 pages of this. You can print this out and begin putting it into envelopes. Let's go back here a second. We printed everything. What if you want to save paper? We go to contribution statements again, last year. We're not going to generate empty statements. When we go into customize, I don't want to include pledges information. I don't want to include itemized details. Heck, I'm not even going to include the church logo, but I'll put these things on. When we go to generate this again, it's going to be the same offering information, the same people, other than those who didn't give anything, but we already filtered it down to people who gave. And it's going to generate quicker. So we'll click download. And we'll see what these look like. Oh, look at that. I bet you everything is one page per person, because all we're showing is a total and a breakdown by funds. And you go one after the next, after the next. You don't have that many funds there. It's going to be one per person. Here's one with a lot of different funds on it. $4,500 by Julie Billings. She split it up a lot. The biggest fund was general fund, as you would hope and expect. So now you can print them out this way. The other thing you can do is say, I want to save paper. I have a lot of people who are tech savvy. I'm going to email them. So if you go here to download contribution statements, then you can say, I'm going to email this message. This is the message that will go in the email. The statements are going to generate as a PDF no matter what. So they're going to look the same way, whether you print them or email them. Emailing, of course, you're not worried about paper or ink at that point, so you may want to put more if you're emailing it. You say you can put a custom message in there. We give you some starter text, and we'll click review and email. What it's going to do is it's going to go through all of those people that you have, those 71 people, and show you the email addresses that you have in the system. And it's also going to show you if you don't have an email address for somebody. Howard Brown doesn't have an email address, so don't try it won't email him anything. You can go through and maybe take off the work email addresses because you don't want to send financial information to their work email. You could also still generate the PDF here to see what it looks like. And I'm zoomed in a little bit, but then you hit that send button. And I'm not going to do that right now because most of these are fake emails, or hopefully they are. I don't want to send somebody something accidentally if I happen to put a real email address in there. It will send a request from our servers with your message and the contribution statement to the individuals. And I got one for my church this year, and it was pretty neat to see how it worked on the receiving end of it. What you could do then is figure out anybody that you need to print still. For the most part, they have emails. The other thing you can do, and I'm not going to show this because we're running low on time and I want to get into Q&A, but you could go through and tag people who either want to receive it by email or want to receive a print statement, and use that. Your default is either print or email, and the other one's the exception. Do your exception, filter down your list, and then print it. So again, these are the different tools available to you. This is how the system works. All right, let me see what other questions there are. I don't think I have any questions right now about contribution statements, unless they're farther up. If you have questions about any of the three things that I covered today, go ahead and enter it to the chat. I'm going to look at my outline and see if I missed anything on any of the three things. Let's see here. I did miss one thing I want to talk about, and I'm glad that I looked for this. This is more of a unique situation, but it'll help out. So let me go ahead and close this. We talked kind of at length yesterday about in-kind gifts. Well, Howard Brown, the one who doesn't have an email address, he gave some in-kind gifts. So I'm going to go to his profile record. I'm going to go and click download and download his contribution statement, just his. And I'm going to go into customize and include everything in there just so you can see all the details. I'm going to generate the PDF for him. When I click download, it's just going to be Howard Brown's. And you're going to see here is the cash that he gave. Oh, he gave in kind for this year, not 2019. So I'll go back. Pardon me. So this gets, you see, I'm on the individual profile. I hit download contribution statement to this year. And it's only going to go year to date because he hasn't given anything in the future yet. If you want the dates on there to be the whole year, you can switch them, but it defaults to this year to date. And I'm going to generate that again. Here we go. Let's see what it looks like. Good, I couldn't load plugin. That's funny. I've never had that error before. There it is, I just refreshed. Little hiccup with my browser. Okay, so if you remember from yesterday, he's given some gifts, but then he gave an in-kind gift with a dollar amount, stock of Zoom for $1,000. You'll see that this shows here in his general fund with that total amount. Then we can go down here, gifts in kind not attributed to a fund. That has no amount. Again, I'm not telling you what you should or should not do for gifts in kinds because you should speak with an accountant who knows that stuff better than I do. But I'm showing you what the software does for that. So if you put a dollar amount on a gift in kind and you put a fund, it's going to show up under that fund with that dollar amount. And if you put no fund and no dollar amount here, it's going to show up separately and just be an acknowledgement of that gift, including the memo. Let's go back to Howard Brown. Let's go to his offerings. I'm on his profile. I'll go down here to offerings. And it'll show offerings for Howard Brown during this time frame. Oh, it's the time frame that I set previously. Let me go and get it into 2020. Oops. And we'll go all offerings. Let me go ahead and show this again. Here's no fund. If I go to Brown and I say in-kind offerings under general fund, but $0 amount, and let's say he gave an old car, and then I'll hit enter. So amount must be between 1 penny and whatever amount for a fund. There's an error. You cannot give to a fund without a dollar amount. That's why I want to double check. I couldn't remember exactly what those rules were. And then if I go back here and I say no fund, but I give a dollar amount, let's say his old car is only $500 and save that. That I can do. So good, out of those three scenarios, there's one I can't do. If I give to a fund, I have to give a dollar amount. But if I don't give to a fund, I can give a dollar amount or not. And we'll go back to Howard. We'll generate a new contribution statement and show you what that looks like. I'm going to get into a question that was emailed to me in the Q&A time frame. So I don't think I took the name down. Oh yeah, Jerry sent that. So Jerry, I'll get to your question. If you're watching live, I'll get to your question in a few minutes. I'll probably save that for the end since it's so specific to your situation, but others might have that too. So I'm going to go back in here to download contribution statement. This year, generate PDF and show you what it looks like. Give it another second. All right. There you can see it. So those are your three options. You have a gift in kind with a dollar amount and a fund, a gift in kind with a dollar amount without a fund, and a gift in kind with no dollar amount and no fund. Of course, you cannot, as we just confirmed, you cannot have a gift in a kind with a fund, but not a dollar amount. So that begs the question, well, how do you apply gifts in kind to pledges? Remember, pledges must go to a fund. So if you are applying it to a pledge or to a fund and you have a pledge to that fund, it works. If you have a pledge where it's only gift in kind, you could create a new fund just for that, but you have to attribute a dollar amount. And of course, pledges have to have a dollar amount. So use those kind of rules as your basis for figuring out how to do it in your church. And you have questions about it, that's where our team comes into play. And you can ask that. That's what I'm into now. Before I get into question and answers though, I do want to remind you of our training manuals, our training webinars, our product updates blog, and our resource center. This webinar today is just one way you can learn how to use the software. We have recorded webinars available in our resource center, but also on our website under training. And we have posts that'll go out occasionally on our blog, and we always have the resource center with those recorded trainings. And that's different than the help we provide, the software support that comes in our online help center, our email, and our phone number. Our support team manages all those things and can answer your specific situations. So let's go ahead and get into Q&A. Type your questions in the GoToWebinar chat. Remember, a recording will be emailed within 48 hours. I was a little late on yesterday's because I had issues with our resource center getting it to upload. But I got it to work this morning, and it was emailed out. The recording was emailed out around 8 o'clock or so, something like that. So if you are watching the recording, you can't ask questions live, go ahead and send them to our support team. They'll be happy to answer them. So without further ado, let me go ahead and look at the questions that Tim hasn't answered. And then if we have time, I'll go back to some of the ones he has. So please show again where to download only one person's offering statement. Joy, oh, good, yeah. We did just demonstrate that again. So hopefully you saw that, but you go to the person's profile and you click download. Next, Joanne says, then all the offerings prior to when the person passed would reflect on the surviving spouse's contribution statement, right? There's been some back and forth with that over the last year. I think we've got it fixed. Tim can correct me if I'm wrong. I've been in part of the discussions, but I haven't been involved in the testing of that, where there were some differences with that. But the goal would be that the person who has lost their loved one, the spouse, the remaining spouse, would have the contribution statement with those gifts. So I'll defer that to Tim or specific situations. There have been instances where people have received a contribution statement after their spouse passed. They received two statements for that year, one where it's joint giving and one where it's only one person giving. And that can be concerning, but the reality is that's what happened. And so there's been different preferences. Some people want that and don't want to have one for the remaining spouse, some want only for the remaining spouse. So I don't remember exactly where we landed with that, but Tim just responded, I believe that to be true. I think they are merged together in a way so that you would have them on one statement. So I can't show that without doing a bunch of different steps before that right now, but I think that's the intention. All right, Cindy saying our statements have the IRS statement at the bottom of the page. How to get the amount to the top like shown in the demonstration? Well, Cindy, we've made some changes since the end of last year on those statements based on feedback, based on, oh, I'll just go to the statement here, based on placement and everything else. You should go and try it right now and see what it looks like. You don't have to send the statement, but I don't remember what all the different feedback was, but I do remember there were some issues with printing and where it showed and everything and how it looked, and so we did some adjustments on that. So this is what it looks like right now. It should be the same for you, depending on your options, depending on what you've typed in here. I think some of it had to do with people typing in more in there and it was looking a little different. I don't remember the specifics, but I can say this is how it's working right now, and it should be the same for you right now too. All right, let me go and take a look at a few of the other questions just to make sure I'm not missing anything before I get into the one that was emailed to me. We talked about memos showing up on statements. When, here's one. What is most common on a send out of a contribution statement? Do we send out quarterly, semi-annual, or yearly distribution? I mentioned that before. It can be whatever you want. If you wanted to do a quarterly statement, or maybe just one person wants a quarterly statement, all you have to do is change that date. It's going to pull from the data in the system, and it's going to pull from it what it is like at that date. So if you go and correct an offering previously, but you've already generated a statement, the new statement will show that change. So it's truly just an export based on the date range that you want, and you can do it as often as you would want. I think the most common is once a year, though. That's what I hear from most churches. All right, next up. So Karen is saying, and I think, Tim, I think you might have answered this incorrectly, actually. Karen is asking, is there a way to change the order on how the custom fields are shown under individuals and households, or is it just the order that they are added? I think I know what you're talking. Tim replied and said all fields are sorted alphabetically. On the profiles, they are shown in the order that you enter them. On the smart groups and the columns, they are shown alphabetically. That's probably a little inconsistent, but I think it makes sense. Ideally, we would be able to change the sort order on each so they're unique. We're looking at things in the long term, and that may be something we add, but that's how it works right now. Alphabetically under columns, alphabetically under smart groups, by entry of order under profiles. So that's going back a few days. That's not really a topic for today, but we've looked at some of the stuff. So that's why it is. And I should mention that you could use a custom field for contribution statement preference or envelope preference. You could say, I want my statements electronically or in print or both. You can use those fields for that purpose. All right, let's see what's next. Is it legal to send a contribution statement via email? Yes, it is legal to do that. Now, how you submit it, you want to make sure you submit it if you're indicating that, but it is entirely legal because people get it. What I would say, though, is go based off of your members' preferences. I don't think you will get a lot of people happy with you if you send them a statement by email if they want it printed. You could, take a hard stance and say, that's how we're doing it this year, but I know a lot of people will want it printed. Now, emailing it to them and having them print it is the exact same as you printing it. The end result is the same, but you want to go by people's preferences. So legally, yes, it's absolutely fine because it's the exact same statement. But by people's preferences, go with what they want. All right, next up. We talked about that one. How do you, oops, pardon my chiming in the background. How do you delete a spouse from offerings who is deceased? Do you have to assign an offering? Oh, here's a great question. I should have covered this more explicitly. Do you have to assign an offering envelope number to generate a giving statement? No, you do not. And in fact, you'll notice that the offering envelope doesn't even appear on the giving statement. We've had some requests for that to be added back, and we're looking at that. But gifts are given by people. Gifts are not given by offering envelopes. Envelopes are labels for people to make it easier to enter and easier to give. But It's all about the people. And so that's why we don't require an offering envelope number. We use internal IDs. I mean, from a database standpoint, you have to have some IDs, but they're internal. That's why you're able to change the envelope number from year to year. It's different than Shepherd staff if you're coming from that. So no, you don't have to have an offering envelope for statements. You don't have to use offering envelopes at all if you don't want to. If your church doesn't use them, you don't have to. They're purely optional to make it easier to enter and easier to track your offerings. All right, what if you never want to renumber and the envelope numbers always remain the same unless you manually remove or reassign a specific number set? Cheryl's asking that. I think I might have covered that before, but more power to you. That's great. You don't have to do that. This is just if you want to. We built the tools for you to do that. Let's see. Answered those. All right. Looks like we've covered a lot of these. Yeah, Karen, hopefully I showed you all the details. You asked, how do you see a detail of person's giving? Hopefully I showed you all of that. I covered it in a couple different ways. A good reminder though, if you go to a person's profile and you go down to the very bottom right corner, it says offerings. If you click on that, it'll take you to the offerings report filtered by that person. All right, let's see what else we have here that I haven't answered. Joanne has a good question that's a tough one. What is the procedure for a divorced couple who previously gave jointly but now is ending their marriage during the current year? Well, that really depends on their preference. I'm not sure the legality of that, so you'll probably want to talk with them. Hopefully they will have spoken with their legal team or their accountant on how they should file their tax statements. But you should go with their requests and figure out how it is. You want to mark them as divorced on the appropriate date and then figure out who is giving moving forward. So their gifts given as a married couple should still be in the system as a married couple, unless they specifically ask you to change that, in which case then you'll have to go back and change those offerings. But you should mark them as divorced on their official divorce date, which will mark them as giving individually. And then if they request that their previous gifts be separated, then you can go in and do that. But I would recommend not doing anything by default. Work with the couple or the individual on their preferences. That can be a messy situation for a variety of reasons. You don't want to make any assumptions by that, but that's how the software works, is that as soon as you mark them as divorced, they would no longer contribute jointly because they're no longer married. But how their previous offerings are shown, that's going to be for you to work with them to decide. It may be some additional work to go and change their previous offerings, but that's the nature of the beast. Cindy has a great question, and I don't have a good answer for you. It says, is there a way to batch print with back-to-back per giver versus print on only one side? No, unfortunately. The only way that we would be able to handle that programmatically, and it may be something we can add in the future, would be to insert blank pages for odd number statements, which would allow you to then use your printer settings to do back-to-back. That's something we can look at in the future, but we don't have that right now. Do I have to check don't renumber for the deceased person? No, you shouldn't, depending on your smart group selection. So that's where if you narrow your smart group to only those who are living, who are members, and you should be narrowing your smart group on offering envelope numbers anyways. Let's go here. If you are showing everyone, and I don't have a deceased person in here right now, but it's going to be based on this criteria. If you are doing members, they are not going to show up anyways because they are no longer living if they are deceased. So that would be my recommendation, is that it won't even become an issue if you filter them out at the beginning. But If you show them, you can click Don't Renumber, and they won't have any new offering envelopes. Let's see. All right. I lost my place. Pardon me 1 second. Okay, when I tried to email contribution statements, some joint givers with email addresses were in the group unable to receive email contribution statements. What is the email contribution statement dependent on? Household email addresses, or both for people in the giving unit? Each address for the first mail. Christy, that seems like an interesting situation. There might be something else going on there, but I can go back and show you one more time how it works, or how it's supposed to work. It could be that again, something else is going on. If I go into givers and I select all and I go to download, well, I don't even have to select all. I'll just leave it unchecked. I've got 73 people. I go to contribution statements and I go to review an email. You're going to get a list of all the email addresses to which it will send. And it's going to show maybe what you're saying. They were unable to receive it, meaning they don't show up here. I wonder if household emails aren't showing up there. That would make sense because it's a family email, not a giver email. But I can see where that would be confusing. All I see is work and personal. I bet that's what's going on, is that it's not showing household emails because the household emails are tied to the address. That may be something we'd look at, and we'll make sure to put that into feedback, but I bet you that's what's going on there. Now, if they show up on this list and they're still not getting it when you check it and send it to them, well, that's going to be on their email side of things. But I bet you that's what's going on, is that it's a household email and it's only showing individual emails. All right, let's see, anything else? Carrie says, my email statements are going to people's junk mail. How can we prevent that? That's probably due to the email address that you have in the system. I would suggest contacting support on that. There's a number of things that can be done, but we don't typically see that happen. So I would guess it has to do with the email address that it's come from. It should be looking like it's coming from your church's email address rather than like the 360 email. So I bet you there's some things on that they either blocked your email address, or there's something with your domain, or there's something with your email provider. There's a number of variables that could be going in with that. I'd recommend contacting support. They can talk you through that. Is it possible to see all givers with their pledge and given to date with a head or behind listed for one report? Thank you, Tara. Yes, there is. All you have to do is go to offerings, go to offering summaries by givers, and then show these different columns: giving and date range, pledge and date range, ahead, behind, percent of goal. And then you can filter it down by everyone, or you can just say everyone who has a pledge during that time. But this is what you're looking for right there. And then you can also sort it by alphabetical, by average gift, giving and date range, all of those things. All right, one more question, I'll get to my email question, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So in order to agree on year-to-date finances, the treasurer and finance secretary would need to have the same start and ending date in order to say include a deposit made at the end of the year, or the deposit is made in the next year. I'm going to read that again, Florence. In order to agree on year-to-date figures, the treasurer and financial secretary would need to have the same starting and ending date in order to say include on a deposit made at the end of the year, where the deposit is made in the next year. Okay, so what you're talking about, we're blending several things together here. We're talking about the date range on offering batches and year-end financial statements. And those are two different things, especially if you then are including, and you might be thinking about this, the pledges. So the pledges are a specific date range, but when you get into this pledged for date range, that's where it becomes a little bit tricky because of the reporting and the ahead, behind, and all of that. But if you're talking about deposits that are going into the bank, what date you put that deposit on is not as important as, or it's not as important to align it with the date that the offerings are attributed to, because you may, let's say you enter the offerings on 12/31. That's the date that they came in, and you make the deposit on January 1st. Well, you can say that that deposit was made on your general ledger on December 31st, even though you took it to the bank on January 1, or you could put it on January 1. That's a call for the treasurer to make, but really the gifts were given in December, so they should show up as income in December, and therefore also be attributed to your December that year's pledges. So again, we're blending three different things together. It makes it a little bit difficult to talk about it conceptually, but that's, those are the things to consider as you're going through it. Your treasurer should have a preference for that. And if you have any other questions about what you should do, well, then you should talk with an accountant. I can tell you what the system does, but as you start talking about making deposits at the bank, that's bringing in another variable to that. All right, and you're saying the treasurer and I always match and report, so an annual report to the church, the figures agree. So that's good. All right. My next and final question is related to gifts in kind. And this is a tough one. So basically, I'll try to summarize what's going on, is that they have people who are giving gifts in kind with values on it, but they don't want the values to show on contribution statements, but they do want to recognize that they gave that gift in the value. So this is going to tie in a few things that we talked about. So Jerry, this is your question. I'm not going to read it in its entirety, and I'm not even sure if you're here. I forgot to take down your last name in my attendee list. Oh, Jerry does look like you are here, so hopefully you're still listening. But I'll show you how this works, and then I'll follow up with an email later on. If you're wanting to generate contribution statements in these two different ways, where you're basically giving two statements to the same individual or individuals, and you're having essentially on one statement group of X group of funds, and on a second statement Y group of funds, with Y group of funds being gifts in kind, you're going to have to set yourself up with funds correctly, and then you're going to have to do a little bit of finagling at statement time. So if you'll remember from yesterday, you have the ability to say exclude a fund from contribution statements. What I would recommend in your situation and any other situations like this, and what was the specific gift that IRAs, we have checks from thriving IRAs that are made directly to the church. So you could say, Thrivent IRA is your fund. You add that fund in and you default to excluding that fund from contribution statements. Do all your gifts. When those gifts in kinds come in, attribute them to the Thrivent IRA. Then generate your contribution statements like normal. That will give you that first set of statements where they're actual financial gifts that can be reported to the IRS. Now to get your next gifts, if you wanted to use the use the Church360 statements, but not have them go to the IRS, what you would have to do is, for one time or one day only, go through here and invert all of your statement details. So you'd say this one is included, but then this one is not, and this one is not, and this one is not. Then when you go to generate your statements, it will only be the Thrivent IRA. And then when you're done with that, reverse it again and switch them back so that you don't forget next year. It sounds more tedious than it actually is. It won't take you that long to do that. But if you don't want to go through that process, I mean, who knows, maybe you have 100 funds, then it's going to take you a little bit longer than if you have the dozen or so that I have. You can do that, and when you do that, you might not change that note too, and you have a pre-written note in there, so you would just replace it with that. The other way of doing that is you can do it offline. If this is not a large number of people, what you could then do is to get your report on that. We'll cover reports on Tuesday, but you could go into summaries by giver, summaries by fund, filter it by, and I don't have any gifts for that right now. Actually, yeah, there would be financial. Let's go add a gift for that real quick. I'm guessing other people have this issue too, which is why I'm showing it live as opposed to just emailing Jerry back. But Howard is our one who we've been using for gifts in kind. So we'll put in here, we'll say Thrivent IRA, and the amount is optional, but let's say it's $500. Then we'll enter. Oh, memo must be present for gift in kind. I forgot about that. Thrivent IRA, there. So it's a separate fund, we've got it there. If you go into offerings now, you can filter it down by Thrivent IRA and then do summaries by giver, and you'll be able to see the totals for those gifts in kind. And so you could just write your letters separately and not go through the rigmarole of contribution statements that aren't going to be reported to the IRS. You can even export this into Excel and do a mail merge if you wanted to. That's beyond the scope of this course. But those are some different options that you have. The end result is you're still tracking everything here. You're still properly attributing whether it goes to the IRS or not. And you're also getting your totals at a church level so that it can be applied to different pledges if you wanted to. So it's kind of the best of all worlds. There's a couple of different options there, but I hope that made sense to you. All right, I am losing my voice. We have a few more minutes before we hit 12, which means I'm well over my time. So I'm going to wrap up. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to our support team. But otherwise, I'm going to sign off for not only today, but for the week. But I'll be back here next week, as I hope you will too. This is the end of our 4th presentation. On Monday, we are going to get into events and attendance. Same bat time, different bat channel. It's going to be a different link, but same place. So I invite you to come back. You'll be getting an email with this recording later on today or early tomorrow. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, special thank you to Tim for being here answering so many of those questions. That makes my life a lot easier. I hope you have a great rest of the day and a great weekend, and I will see you next week. Have a great day. Bye.